Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism. My guest today is Rabbi David Wolpe, the Max Webb Senior Rabbi of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, named the most influential rabbi in America and one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world. He is a teacher, a columnist, and he is featured on TV and radio. The author of 8 books, including Why Be Jewish and the most recent, David, The Divided Heart, which has been optioned for a movie by Warner Brothers. Please welcome Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi David Wolpe, my friend, thank you for coming on Zionist Studios and our opportunity for conversation on Zionism. This is our moment where we're taking that word Zionism back. And there's no one who speaks more eloquently and leads us. And I want you to start off of a story that you told at an AIPAC convention about Kishinev and whether we should go to Uganda and call that Israel.
This is an amazing story. I'm so glad that you reminded me of it. I haven't thought of it in a while, but the spirit of it is very powerful. This was actually something that happened in some ways between Herzl and Weizmann. So it was one of the early Zionist congresses where it was right after the Kishinev pogroms, which were a huge shock to the Jewish system, and actually gave a big impulse, big push to Zionism, because people in Russia started to realize this is not sustainable. And even though the pogroms were small by the standards of what we sadly came to know later, in the Jewish world, they were, as I said, a shockwave, front page of the New York Times, far away. So at the time, the British thought that they might be able to solve the problem of Israel and the Jews by just sending the Jews to Uganda, because they had territory there that they could easily have the Jews inhabit and they would be safe. And Herzl thought it was a good idea. He thought maybe later on there would be a transfer to Israel, but at first he thought they got to get the Jews out of Europe, and so let's bring them to Uganda. The push against it, of course, was the idea that Israel was our home, Uganda wasn't our home. And it came to a vote. And the vote was very close. And then they came to the delegates from Kishinev, who had just endured the pogroms, who had lost relatives in the pogroms. And when they said, would you consider Uganda? They said no. And Weizmann says, at that moment, Herzl became a Zionist. Because what Herzl wrote about it later was they had the rope around their necks and they still said no. And that amazing fortitude tells us that it always was Israel for the Jewish people. And that Israel wasn't, when we describe Israel as a haven, Israel's not supposed to be a haven. Israel's a home. It's a different thing. And so the tie of the Jewish soul to the land of Israel is ancient and inextricable, and even those who faced terrible persecution when offered somewhere else said no.
So I'm going to take you back, David, to give us a little biblical, because I follow your sermons at Sinai Temple. Lech Lecha. We're the only people that have a land as part of our existence. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean? Where do you interpret that?
So that's how we begin, right? The Jewish people begins in a journey towards the land. And all of the Torah, in a sense, is bracketed by, human beings start off in the Garden of Eden, and then Israel ends up in the land of Israel. And the idea is we started off in paradise. We obviously don't live in paradise. The question is, what can you do in this real world place to make a home that is good and kind and sustaining and all of that? And from the very beginning of Abraham's journey, that's what the journey is all about. It's all about arriving in the land of Israel and then all about building the land of Israel. And sometimes losing and regaining. We know all the back and forth of Jewish history. But remember that we always pray towards Israel. And let me tell you a wonderful thing that one of my teachers once told me. I thought this was great. I took a weekend trip to be a scholar in residence somewhere. Rabbi Henry Fisher of blessed memory. When I came into school the next day, and I told him I had just been in New York, he said, "Tell me something. Did you change your watch?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I knew I was coming right back." He said, "That's why in the Amidah, in the central Jewish prayer, Jews pray for rain when it's time for there to be rain in Israel." He said they lived in France, they lived in Babylonia, they lived in Los Angeles, but they didn't pray for rain in Los Angeles. They prayed for rain in Israel because they knew they were going to be right back. So we never changed our clock. And I thought that was such a beautiful idea.
That's a beautiful story, and that really talks about this journey that the American Jewish community is on, the world Jewish community is on, the Israel, and we're faced in these times today where the word Zionism hasn't been part of that journey. How would you're one of the top leaders of the American Jewish community, what do we need to do to bring back that beautiful thought of the journey and beautiful word of Zionism forward?
I think, I mean, for me, for you, for many of the people listening, Zionism is associated with love. That's what it is. Zionism is not a harsh word. It's not an exclusionary word. It's the desire to create something beautiful in the land of Israel. And we have unfortunately allowed sometimes those who oppose us to turn it into a word that has overtones of conquest and exclusion. And really, Zionism is about, the Psalms, Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascent. You make an aliyah, it's a place to go up to. And so I really do believe that the way you reclaim Zionism is by reclaiming its associations. Its associations are community and love and learning, and also, Torah. That's where, the revelation, it speaks again and again and again of returning to Zion, because that was the cornerstone and part of the reason why you have this disproportionate focus on Israel throughout the world, sometimes to our detriment. But it's because, weirdly, this tiny people on their tiny land radiated such power from that place that it affected the entire world. And so I think if we can pull back the meanings of what Zionism really is from biblical times onward, and many, many people still see it that way and speak of it that way, we'll be better off. And honestly, I say this not only because I'm facing you, my friend, but what JNF does and is doing is a big part of that.
As students who aren't necessarily Jewish, getting to go on Caravan for Democracy allows us to speak in a way to the nuance of Israel.
One of your writings, you talked about when we were weak, we were popular. When we became strong, we became unpopular. Elaborate on that for me.
So Saul Bellow, the great American Jewish writer, once said that Israel is the moral Switzerland of the world. People take their moral vacations in Israel, like they take their physical vacations in Switzerland. And it's true. It's like when the world didn't saw us as benighted and weak and poor and so on, it was fine. Then it was fine. But the idea that Jews have courage and power and all of that, that's uncomfortable. And I would say, though, it wasn't fine even then. I mean, we have to be honest. One of the weird things about anti-Semitism is it is a protean hatred. You can hate Jews because they're weak, because they're strong, because they're communists, because they're capitalists, because they assimilate, because they always stay separate. It doesn't matter what Jews do. There will always be reasons to hate them. And so even when Israel wasn't strong, there were people who hated. They were just not as emboldened to say it. Now that Israel is strong, I think they feel, oh, well, now there's no reason not to express it. The only thing I would remind people is that strength in and of itself is not a fault. Strength cruelly used is a fault, but strength is not a fault.
So in our community, you know, we are faced with, by the way, since the beginning of America as a country and the Jews being here, now we have 1948. We have a home and we have a homeland. How do we communicate about that to ourselves and to others?
In the Torah itself, when the Jews are about to cross into the promised land, 2.5 tribes, Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Menashe, say to Moses, you know what, we actually like the land here in Transjordan. We don't really want to go into Israel. We're perfectly comfortable here. That is, Jews have always stayed outside the land, always, from the beginning of time, from the first moments. And what Moses says to them is, okay, you're allowed to stay outside the land as long as you fight for the land. And I feel like American Jews have the exact same position. We're allowed to be outside of Israel as long as we're willing to fight for Israel. And our fight comes obviously in different ways. It's not an actual fight, but to advocate for it, to have the courage to stand up for it, to give our children the courage to stand up for it, not to let social pressure determine our moral commitments, and to recognize, that this is the dream of our ancestors for thousands of years, and how blessed and lucky we are that dream is fulfilled. I also want to say, no, Israel is not morally completely unproblematic. And there are real difficulties there, and real challenges there, and real pains there. It's very hard. And I don't want to ignore the fact that there is suffering from the Palestinians and that it is difficult. Nobody ever promised that the realization of any dream comes for free. We have to grapple with that and understand it. But the second side of this is, I was just in Dubai. I went there to watch the World Chess Championship of all things. And I thought it's remarkable now that while some people who used to be our friends are sometimes expressing themselves as enemies, all these people who used to be our enemies have suddenly become our friends. I think the people who live in the region are starting to realize that Israel is a remarkable place and that friendship with it is a good thing for them and for the world.
So I'm going to segue to the rabbinic leadership, because they take credit and they take a lot of battles on. And one of the issues that has been raised even on this show was there's so many in the rabbinic community that are utilizing the political concerns that they may have to become talking from a pulpit on an anti-Israel narrative. What do we do? How do we communicate? How do we change that conversation?
Well, actually, there is a project that some of us are working on in terms of educating in rabbinical school. Part of it is I think they never understood deeply the way those of us who maybe have a few years on them, where Israel came from and what it went through to get to where it is, and all they saw was the colossus and they never saw the growth. And so they don't have an understanding of the fragility of it. But our mutual friend, Danny Gordis, the other day, I texted him in Israel and I said, Danny, do me a favor. And I had never heard this before. I said, look with me at the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. How many of the people who signed it came from democracies? And we looked through it. The only one we could find was Golda Meir, which meant that the people who founded Israel, all of them came from totalitarian states. Weizmann, Ben Gurion, Jabotinsky, all of them came. None of them grew up in democracies. And they founded the state in a place where there were no other democracies, right? So you have people who never grew up in a democracy, who go to a place where there are no democracies, where everyone hates them and wants to kill them, and they build a democracy. If it was perfect and frictionless, it would have been beyond a miracle. So there are problems, but people have to appreciate what it took to get where we are before they criticize.
When was your first trip to Israel?
My first trip to Israel was when I was 12 years old with my father and the synagogue trip. So, and it was, the last time my father had been there was before 1967. And this was the first time that he went back after 1967. And what I remember best about that trip was it was the first and one of maybe a handful at most of times that I saw my father cry, because when he went up to the wall, he cried.
And, I will take it as a commercial interruption as well, because at Jewish National Fund, and Sinai Temple is like one of those role models of taking congregational trips to Israel and families, and we're going to be investing more and more in congregational trips to Israel. And in high school, what program did you go on?
Ramah. I went on Ramah.
And how long was that program?
The summer. And then I lived there in rabbinical school later on.
So one of the issues, David, that we have been dealing with how to educate for Zionism, how to talk about, you talk about the rabbis to know it, and you have the experience of being there at 12. You have the experience of being there over a summer, not a 10-day trip, a summer program. I believe that in the organized Jewish world, we gave up on our teenagers. For 25 years ago, 19,000 of them were going to Israel per year on programs of 4 weeks or more. A year before COVID, that was down to 3,000. How do we get back to investing in teenagers?
I think the best way to do it, honestly, is, to offer trips that are both exciting and not expensive, because we know that kids do what their peers do. And it's true that they have many, many, many more options now than they used to. And school sometimes takes the summer in ways that it didn't when we were kids. But still, to be able to provide credit, maybe to do a course, to do whatever it takes to get kids there, because I think to have the experience is unparalleled. To actually be there is what you want for these kids. And the longer that they can stay there, the more they can appreciate and soak up what it actually is to be in the state of Israel.
So when you're speaking to and I'm using the younger Jewish community, and they talk about Zionism, and they talk about Black Lives Matter. We talk about all of those other movements. How do we come together with it, or do we, or should we avoid it? How do we have that conversation?
So it depends on exactly what they're trying to say. Here's my general take on it. I don't deny that in America, if you're about to be born in America, is it easier to be born Jewish or to be born Black? I mean, obviously there are Black Jews, but I'm saying to be born looking like me or looking, obviously, with Judaism, you get a head start. And I think to deny the genuine struggles of Blacks in America is ill-befitting a Jew or the Jewish community. It is nonetheless true that the best way to make a success of your life is not to see yourself as a victim. Even if you are born into circumstances that somewhat victimize you, those who take on the identity of a victim do less well than those who don't. And so part of our task as Jews is to acknowledge the difficulties that others have, and also to help them and ourselves, because sometimes Jews do the victim thing too, ourselves understand that only by initiative and only by effort and only by struggle and only by faith and hope can you move forward. And by the way, Zionism is a beautiful example. You say, look, for thousands of years, Jews thought the only way that they could establish a state in Israel was God had to do it for them. No way they could do it. God had to do it for them. And along came the Zionists, some of them religious, but most of them not, and said, you know what? We're not waiting anymore. We're not waiting for God. We're going to do it. And that assumption of agency is so incredibly important. And that's part of the message that I believe Judaism can give to the world. And so I try really hard as I can, to stay apolitical. But I'm not unaware of the enormous power that empowering has. And I think that that's our role here, is to preach the empowerment of individuals and groups, because we've experienced it so powerfully ourselves.
So here on Zionism Studios, we have had people from all different walks of life talking about Zionism, Israelis, non-Israelis, younger, older, all the different dimensions, colors, and looks. How do we as leaders, how do we make Zionism cool? How do we talk to people about standing up? We just saw that what happened in a congregation in Texas, just because it was a Jewish congregation, and so we have that reality that people are talking about, and you had the issues in Los Angeles. Don't wear your mezuzah, don't wear your yarmulke. How do we stand up and tell the people that why it's important to be a Zionist Jewish, and why is it cool?
Well, a part of it is we are countercultural. We've always been countercultural. It builds character to have courage. That's what you want from yourself and for others. You can't really live a good life if you don't have courage. And we want to be able to raise children who are not afraid because they're not afraid, not because they'll never be a threat. There's always a possibility of a threat, but because they believe that who they are shouldn't be hidden. And also, I think we have to somewhat take these lessons from Jewish history. I just had the opportunity to speak in Washington, and I was talking about Israel and the current situation. I told the story that 30 years ago, some of your listeners probably know this, right outside the walls of Jerusalem, there's a valley. and it's called the Valley of Hinnom, and it's where Jews get their name for hell, Gehenna. And the reason we get our name for hell from that valley is because that's where Canaanites used to sacrifice children. And Jews looked at that and they thought that's hell. And about 30 years ago, maybe a little more now, some archaeologists were excavating in hell. And they found the oldest bit of Torah we have, 2 rolled up silver amulets. You can see them at the museum, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And what they said was, it was the priestly blessing, the Yivarechecha. May God bless you and keep you. May God's countenance shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God be with you and grant you peace. Which means that the oldest surviving bits of Torah we have, more than 500 years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, 2,500 years ago, the oldest surviving bits of Torah we have are blessings of peace that were snatched from hell. And that is part of the Jewish story. And we have to tell our kids that the Jewish story is not the headline in the New York Times. The Jewish story is the story of thousands of years of struggle and vision and hope. And those things are never without complications and messiness. But where else do you find a story like this? Where else do you find a story of a people that didn't speak a language for thousands of years? They read it, they knew it, but they didn't speak it. And it gets revived in a new land that return, that come from places where there are no democracies and create a democracy, that survived the greatest slaughter in human history. And then somehow the survivors of that slaughter win a war for independence of a country. I mean, it's a remarkable, astonishing, and wonderful story. And we just have to keep telling it.
So, David, there is the great teller of our story is Rabbi David Wolpe. I know you have a new book coming out. I remember the first Why Be Jewish, and you are on TV and radio. You're doing podcasts. Matter of fact, I know you've done interviews with people from J Street and ZOA together on your.
It's true. We bring every view we can.
And that is, so I look at you as such a role model and a mentor, a friend, and I thank you, and I ask you to give a message. The story, the pride of Zionism, if you're going to do that in that 1 minute out there to our audience out there, why have the pride of waving the flag of being a Zionist?
I think you should wave the flag whether you are Jewish or not, because this is the realization of a people's dream who never gave up. And despite the fact that much of the world was devoted for thousands of years to thwarting and preventing them from realizing that dream, and thwarting and preventing them from even being on this earth, nonetheless, through the help of other good people outside the Jewish community, through faith, and I would say through God's help, but take that or leave that, whichever you choose, through some kind of miraculous endurance, we worked a miracle. And if that isn't an inspiration, I don't know what is. The fact that the civil rights movement took its inspiration from the Exodus is another way of saying the Jewish story is the story of humanity. And Israel, in that sense, represents a human triumph, not just a Jewish triumph.
Rabbi David Wolpe, from Lech Lecha, Exodus, the civil rights movement, the journey continues. You're leading the way. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you, even though it's a screen see, but still always wonderful, Russell.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you in person.
Me too.
To watch this and all of our past episodes, go to ZTV, our Zionism Studios YouTube page, and subscribe to get notifications.